It's time for a pattern review. This is the fourth pants in the pants series, the cargo style pants. So if that's some content you would like to see, keep on watching. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we are going to do a quick pattern review, and then guess what? Off to the sew along. Now, before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Hello, ciao, guten tag, aloha, hola, konnichiwa, wagwan, bonjour. If you are returning, you know what to do. Go get your quick snack, something to drink, come on back. Let's do this pattern review and then off to the sew along. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this video. All right, so I'm not going to take much time on this pattern review because some of this you will hear in the sew along. So let's go ahead and talk about the pattern that I use. So the pattern that I use is New Look 6644. I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen, but it's this pattern right here, New Look 6644. So I do have a sew along for this that you could also get to that right after the pattern review because you want to hear this at first. But I did view C on the pattern, which is the cargo style pants, but you have elastic at the bottom. So let's go ahead and get into the pattern description. So the pattern description for this is you have a V-neck style knit top, which is view A. View B is your cargo style pants. The only difference is view B, it has two thigh or cargo style pockets, and then you have tabs at the bottom for the hem. View C, you have of course the elastic waist, two side seam pockets, two one cargo style pocket, which I did too because I want it on both sides, of course. And then you have the elastic at the bottom. So that is the pattern description for this pattern. Let's go ahead and talk about notions used. So the notions used for this pattern is I use two buttons, even though in the back of the pattern envelope it says one button because normally you have one pocket, cargo style pocket, but I did two, so I used two buttons. Now I made my own trims, and you will see that in the sew along, but I made my own trim for the side of the pockets for sure. And then I also made my own drawstring. Now I did not put the drawstring on the pants. I don't know why, but I just figured to go without the drawstring, but I do have it and I will put it inside the cargo style pants. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about the fabric used. So the fabric used for these cargo style pants is just basically your broadcloth cotton fabric. All right. Now these are a wearable muslin, but it doesn't even look like it's wearable muslin. It looks like I meant to do this. Okay. I didn't know if I was going to like the pattern, so that's why I tested it out with a wearable muslin, and I'm glad that I did, and I will be making these again. But the fabric used is just cotton fabric. For my trim, I just used some scrap and carved fabric from my stash, and then just some decorative buttons. But that's the fabric used for this pattern. All right, let's talk about, I'm not going to get into pattern pieces simply because you will see that in the sew along, but let's talk about pattern sizing. So for this pattern, the pattern comes in one envelope, size 8 to 20. The size that I cut was size 20. All right, for this pattern. Let's talk about modifications. Did I make any modifications? No, I did not make any modifications outside of adding another pocket to the thigh area to have two cargo style pockets and then another decorative button and some trim. Other than that, I didn't make any modifications. Of course, my normal one that I would have to size up the hips, but you will see that in the sew along as well. But yeah, no, I didn't make any more modifications outside of that. Let's talk about, did it look like the photos or the drawing on the pattern envelope? Absolutely. It looks exactly like it. The only difference is I did not add 3 rows of elastic at the hem because I wanted it a softer style elastic. And then at the waist, I did do 2 rows of elastic, but you will hear that in the sew along for sure. Are the instructions easy to follow? Yes, they are super easy to follow. So I feel like on the pattern envelope, I don't think that it actually rates it on Simplicity website, but I would say if they rated this, it would probably be average as the skill level. But it is super easy to sew. I will say that for sure. All right, let's talk about likes and dislikes. I have no dislikes for this pattern. Everything is all love. I love this pattern. I think it was so dope and amazing, okay, to have elastic case cargo style pants. All right, let's talk about first time experiences. I don't have any first time experiences because you guys know I was in the military, so I have worn many of cargo style pants, okay? Being that I had to wear a uniform all the time, okay? So let's not talk about that, but I don't have any first time experience whatsoever. Would I sew it again? Yes, I would. I have plans to sew it again. I'm going to get some more solid color fabric in order to sew this again, but I think next time I sew it, I want to do it in a twill, and I do have some in my stash. So we will see how that pans out, all right? Would I recommend this pattern to other? Absolutely. I did a sew along because I know you guys would probably ask me, could you do a sew along? And I have not done a sew along in a couple of months now. I think about 2 months. So I figured, you know, go ahead and do a sew along so you could see how to put these pants together. And let's talk about my pattern rating. So my pattern rating for this pattern is a 5 out of 5 because I thought these pants were amazing. I'm glad that I filmed the sew along for it. At first I was like, let me film it. If I don't like the style of the pants, I will not post it, but I went ahead and filmed it for you guys as well. All right, so that's it for the pattern review. Now that the pattern review is over, let's go ahead and get on to the sew along. All right, so I'm gonna show you how to basically take your crotch depth measurement. So I have my pants on, but you want something fitted. I'm just wearing the pants so you could see it, but you want to take from basically where you want the top of your pants to go. Now I'm taking from my waist, my natural waist, where that bend is. I'm taking from there all the way down to the chair, and I'm going to write that number down. This is my crotch depth, and I'll show you when we get to the pattern. All right, so mine is 13. Write whatever number it is down for you. The other thing that you want to do is check your crotch seams, okay? So I'm gonna put this in between my legs. I'm gonna start at the top portion of my pants. Now, I advise you to have just some, you know, panties, thong if you wear thongs, whatever you want to have on, some underwear, and go from wherever you like to wear your pants all the way up to the back where you want it to stop, okay? So I'm gonna put mine right here and measure that, okay? Now, make sure it's not twisted in between and just measure from the front to the back. I'm going to turn around so you can see the back, and you're going to measure and take that number. Now, I know what my number is. My number is 28. Do whatever number that you want. Now, because for this, I will either do 28 or 30. I'll figure that out on how much ease I want in my pants, okay? So let's go over to the sewing table so we can get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get into these cargo pants. And the pattern that I am using is New Look 6644 for the sew along. Now, I was up on the fence on if I wanted to do a sew along for this pattern or not, but I know many of you have asked if I would do a sew along for the cargo pants. Now, originally I was going to choose Simplicity 8889, which is a Mimi G pattern, but then I got to thinking I have done 2 to 3 Mimi G patterns for the pant series, so let's go ahead and make a change and do a different pattern. Now, when it comes to tools, let's talk about tools and supplies. When it comes to tools and supplies, go ahead and turn over. I'm going to put it up on the screen, but go ahead and turn over to the back of your pattern. And I'll be doing view C, which is the elasticated cargo pants. But for this pattern, you can use whatever fabric you want. However, I'm just using a cotton fabric because this will be a test to see if I like it, to be honest with you. But for this pattern, the only notions that you will need is 1 5/8 inch wide button and then 4 1/4 yard of 3/8 inch wide elastic. If you do not have 3/8 wide elastic, you can use a 1/2 inch elastic, okay? So you can do that. Just make sure that you make your casing about 1/4 inch bigger like I will be doing, all right? Now, When it comes to tools and supplies that you need, of course, you're going to need your scissors, your seam ripper, your marking tools. You're also going to need some pencils, pens, rulers, point turners. So, you know, basically your regular sewing supplies that I always mention in every sew along. All right. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into the pattern instructions. So let's go ahead and talk about the pattern instructions for this pattern, New Look 6644. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm doing view C, but you can follow along with the cutting layout to cut out your fabric. The only thing now for me, I'm using 45-inch fabric, which would be 3A on mine. So another thing is pattern piece number 17 and 19 are your elastic guides. So you will not be cutting that out of fabric. You will be cutting that out of elastic. All right. Another note that you want to make is where you see single thickness right here for pattern piece number 8 and pattern piece number 16, which are your casing and your yoke back. One thing you need to make note of is one is with the pattern face down, the other with the pattern face up if you cut in single layers. However, I'm using a solid and I'm doing a double layer, so I will not be paying any attention to that. So I'm cutting all my pattern pieces with the right side of the fabric facing up. I hope that makes sense. All right, but pay attention to whichever cutting layout that you are doing for 44 to 45 inch or 58 to 60 inch. Make note of all the cutting layouts. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct these pants. All right. All right. So let's talk about the pattern pieces you will need in order to construct these pants, these cargo pants. You will need pattern piece number 6, which is your front. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Pattern piece number 7, which is the back. You need to cut 2 of fabric. I will be doing view C, but I will make note of what pieces to cut out for view B if you decide to do that as well. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 8. This is the yoke back. You need to cut 2, and this pattern piece is for both B and C. The next pattern piece for B, you need to cut out pattern piece number 9, which is your back pockets. If you want back pockets, I will not be doing back pockets. Pattern piece number 10 is back flaps for view B. I will not be doing that as well. So the next pattern piece after that is pattern piece number 11. Now pattern piece number 11 is your pockets. So if you want pockets, this is your pocket for the side part of your pants to put your hands in. So this is pattern piece number 11 for both view B and C. You need to cut 4 of those. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 12. This is your side pocket for the side part of your pants. It's going to go this way. You need to cut 2 of fabric for both view B and view C. Now, here's the thing. So on view C, it only shows 1 side pocket. I'm doing 2 for both side of my pants, right? So I will be doing basically what view B says and cut 2 instead of cut 1. But this is your side pocket. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 13, which is your side pocket band. For 13, if you are doing view B, you need to cut 2. If you're doing view C, you need to cut 1. I will be cutting 2 of this pattern piece. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 14, which is your side flap for both view B and view C. Now, for this one, you need to cut 4 if you're doing view B, and then you need to interface 2. If you're doing view C, you need to cut 2 and interface 1. However, because I will be using this flap on both sides of my pants, even though I'm doing view C, I will be cutting 4 and interfacing 2. Now, pattern piece number 15 is your tabs if you are doing view B on that. So you need to cut 2 of that pattern piece if you are doing view B. Moving on, because I'm not doing that. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 16, which is your casing. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Pattern piece number 17 is your waist elastic. Basically, you will cut this out of elastic and you will feed it all the way through the casing when you create your casing, okay? So you need to cut 2 of those. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 18, which is your leg band. If you're doing view C for the elastic casing, you need to cut 2 of this pattern piece. Cut 2 of fabric, okay? And then pattern piece number 19 is your leg elastic for view C, and you need to cut 6 because you will have 3 rows of elastic for that leg elastic, all right? Now, I do want to recap. If you notice that everything you will pretty much cut out of fabric. So I hope that all makes sense of which ones you cut out of fabric and which one you cut out of elastic. So go ahead and move all your pattern piece to the side so I can show you how to make the adjustments that I'm going to make. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 6 and 7. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the front, which is pattern piece number 6. So what I want you to do is grab your ruler, a pen, and a calculator, all right? So now I have done this. Oh, and you also will need your tape measure. Now I have done this to cut down on some of the time, you know, just to basically show and tell, all right? So the first thing you will need is your ruler, your tape measure, calculator, and your pen, and then get some paper just in case you have to size up your pattern, all right? So the first thing you want to do is at the hip line, you want to make a line across, all right? So I have already done that, and I measured, and I'm cutting a size 20 because of my hips. The waist is elastic casing, so I could snap that onto my waist. I'm not really worried about that, but I do want to make sure that my pattern is accurate at the hips, all right? Now, because my hips is a 44 and a half, I want room because this cotton fabric does not stretch, so I am going for a 49-inch hip. Reason being is because when I did 48 last time for the Black Panther pants, it did not fit. It was super tight. So I'm gonna go 1 inch up to a 49. If it's too big, I could take in, but I cannot expand if it's too small, all right? So I measured across. So from here to here was 12.5 inches. Now, because I have 2 pant legs for the front, I need to multiply this by 2, which gave me 25. Now, the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I have 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the left side, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance along this curve, okay? So 5/8 plus 5/8 is 1 1/4. Now that's just for one pant leg. You have to do the same thing for the other pant leg. So when you add 1.25 or 1 1/4 plus another 1 1/4 or 1.25, you get 2.5, which is the seam allowance. You have to take the seam allowance out to know exactly how much you're going to have across when it's sewn together, all right? So that's where the 2.5 come in. So when you take 25 minus 2.5, you get 22.5. So basically what happens is just the front, when you have 2 of the front pant legs sewn together, it gives you a circumference of 22.5. So across the front, you have 22.5. Now, don't worry about this note that I have here because I'll talk about that here shortly. You're going to do the exact same thing at the hips for the back. Now, I'll talk about the back here in a minute, but I just want to focus on the front. All right. Now, the next thing you want to do is measure your crotch curve. Now, I'm going to show you how you do it. All right. I'm going to show you how you measure. The first thing you want to do is put on a pair of shorts. You could do it in your panties, underwear, whatever you want to, measure yourself in. Measure from the top part of that band all the way to the back bottom band. Okay. Then that will give you your crotch curve. All right. Now I'm just going to tell you my crotch curve is a 28. All right. So what I want to do is make sure that the front and the back would measure a 28. All right. Now I'm going to be honest with you. I am taking the same measurements from Simplicity 9114 to do this. And the reason why is because those fit extremely well. So I am taking numbers from that pattern to use on this pattern. Now, please keep in mind that the front also have a casing, the back have a yoke and a casing as well. So you're going to have to add those numbers in, which I will explain that as well. So the first things first, measure around your crotch curve from top all the way to the bottom. All right. So you want to measure this. Once you measure that, write that number down. Now I have 11.5 for the front crotch curve. Now I'm gonna go ahead and bring this back in simply because I want you to see it in both front and back. So just to back up just a quick second, the hips on this one, on the front pattern piece, came out to 22.5. The hips in the back, now you have to find where your hips are in the back of your pattern. Now how I did that is I just took the front, matched it up with the back, and drew a line. So you have a dot here, so I just made sure my dots and my line match up where that crotch curve line is, and then I made a mark on both the back and then measured across. That's how I got this line at my hips. That's where my hips are in the back of my pant. Now remind you, you're going to have a yoke back and a casing, so when this falls down, your hips will be right around here, all right? Now, I also measured around the curve of my back. That back curve gave me 12.5 inches, all right? So now when you measure, so when you add 11.5 and 12.5, I get 24. All right, I'm gonna do it on the calculator so you can see this. 11.5 plus 12.5 gives me 24. Well, I need a 28, so that's not enough. However, I know that there is a yoke piece right here, all right? So I'm gonna move this over. So now we're gonna look at the yoke pattern piece because I wanna talk about this crotch curve before you get to adding anything, okay? So now grab pattern piece number 8, your yoke back. All right, so now that I have pattern piece number 8, now remind me this goes right here. You match up the notches right here, and then you're gonna have that yoke back. Now, first things first, I have already made notes on my pattern to remind myself exactly what everything, measured, okay? Now, what you want to do is you want to take your tape measure, and you're gonna measure the top to the bottom of your yoke. So you measure from the top to the bottom. That gives me roughly about 3 inches, all right? So I'm gonna put 3 inches, and I'm just gonna write it this way, 3 inches. And this tells me that the top and bottom, from top to bottom, is 3 inches. Now remind you, you have to take 5/8 of an inch from the back because this is going to attach to the bottom of our pants, and the top is going to attach to the casing. So you have to remove 5/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom. So you're gonna take 3 inches minus 1.25, that's 5/8 of an inch from the bottom seam allowance and 5/8 of an inch from the top seam allowance. So grab your handy dandy calculator and do 3 minus 1.25, and that gives you 1.75, all right? So now what you have is if you grab your curve, you take the 11.5, whatever yours is, measure whatever your curve is, 11.5 minus 12.5 along this curve, which gave me 24, okay? So I take that 24 plus the 1.75. which gives me 25.75. Now I told you I need a 28 minimum, all right? So that means I'm still short 2.25. So my casing needs to be 2.25 in order to give me the length that I need, all right? So let me put the calculator over to the side, and now what you need to do is grab pattern piece number 16, which is your casing. All right, so now that I have pattern piece number 16, the casing, you're going to do essentially the same thing that you just did for pattern piece number 8, your yoke. So you're gonna measure from the top all the way down, and that gives me roughly about 4 and 8. That gives me roughly about 4 and 7/8. So 4 and 7/8 is the same as saying 4.875. All right. And then because the same thing goes top and bottom, now remind you, you're cutting 2 of these. So what you want to do is you will want to measure the length. So from whatever size you're cutting all the way across, all right? So mine comes out to be 24 24.5. Make sure you press your pattern piece too. So I'm gonna put width equals 24.5, all right? Now because I need to cut 2, I'm gonna multiply that by 2. I'm sorry, 25. 24.25 times 2 gives me 48.5 as a waist measurement, all right? Now remind you that my waist is only a 33, so because it's a 33, this is too big, and of course I'm gonna make it smaller by putting elastic through it, all right? And then if I take the seam allowance of 2.5, that still gives me a 46-inch waist. So of course it's elastic, so you could basically pop it back onto your waist, all right? So there's no problem there with the width of the casing. Now back to the height. Now remind you, this bottom piece is going to be attached to that yoke back. So that's 5/8 of an inch from the bottom. And because this will be folded, now remind you, this will be folded in half, you have 5/8 at the top, which gives you 1.5. So 1.25 from the top and the bottom casing. So now when I do 4.875 minus 1.25, it gives me 3.625. Now what I'm going to do is take this 3.625, I'm going to add the 11.5 for the front. Then I'm going to add the curve for my back, which is 12.5. All right, and then I'm gonna add my yoke. So I have 12.5 plus 11.5 plus the 3.625 for the casing. And then I'm just gonna move my pattern piece over to the side, and then I'm going to add for my yoke. Now my yoke is 1.75. Now that gives me 29.375. Now, the only thing I have to do is look to see if the seam allowance is included in this. Now, I did not remove the seam allowance for the front, which is that top pattern piece, which is 5/8, or the back, which is also 5/8. So because of that, I need to take out 1.25. So I'm gonna subtract for that seam allowance for the top of both the front and the back. So that gives me 28.125. That's exactly what I need in order to make sure that my entire pants would fit and not be tight on my behind, all right? So that's exactly how you measure your crotch curve to make sure that you will not have, you know, a lot of bunching and tightness, and or your front will be higher in the front and not so high in the back. Now, another thing I want to say is, say for instance that you need more room in the back for your bootay instead of in the front, which you need to do. All right, so let's say that you are removing 2 inches from the top of this pattern. So you would just measure down your 2 inches. You have 2 options of either tracing this pattern while you remove that 2 inches. So I'm just gonna fold it in to show you. So you would remove that 2 inches or whatever you need to move. And then you would take this back pattern piece and extend the top by that 2 inches that you removed from the front, all right? So then that means the front is brought down because you don't need a lot of room in the front, but you add it to the back to accompany your behind, all right? Now let's say it's the opposite, to where you may have a pooch or a pouch or a stomach in the front, all right? And you need more room in the front instead of the back. Same thing applies. Let's say for instance, you need your front to have that 2 inches. So you would add 2 inches at the top of this pattern, but then remind you, you have the flap and all that good stuff. So you would need to bring this flap line down 2 inches, make a line, and then remove it from the top of this pattern piece. So what that would look like is you would bring this flap line down 2 inches, make a dot on both sides, 2 inches, make a line across, and make sure you drop these dots down, all right? And then remove 2 inches, all right? So if this flap measures 1.25 inches like it does down, you need to go down, you know, another 2 inches and then down another 1.25 inches, so it's not far up on that 2 inches, okay? So that's what you need to do for that, and then you would add 2 inches to the top of the front pattern. All right, if you have any questions about that, just send me a DM on Instagram or put it in the comment section below. Could you please explain that a little bit more in details? All right, so now that I talked about all the adjustments, go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces. If you need to make any adjustments to the hips like I do, I have showed you this before on how to make adjustments to the hips. Now what I'm going to do is I have to add 3/4 of an inch to give me 49 inches across. So I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch to the side seam. Now this is not the side seam where the curve is. It's not the side seam. This is the crotch seam. This is the end seam. All right. So this is the side seam. So I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch to the back pattern piece. And where my pocket is right here, I'll be adding 3/4 of an inch right here. That's what the note right here tells me to do, simply because I want 49 inches. All right. So that's the only adjustment that I need to make to my cargo style pants. Whatever adjustments you need to make, go ahead and make that now before you start cutting out your pattern. All right. Once you finish cutting out your fabric, come on back so we could go ahead and start constructing our cargo pants. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the sewing of New Look 6644, which is the cargo pants. So you should have cut all your pieces out and interface pattern piece number 14, which is your side flaps. Now, like I said before, I am doing view C on this pattern with the elastic. So now I will not be doing the back pockets for my pants, but if you are doing that, go ahead and follow steps 1 through 7 on the pants. All right, now I have the instructions out and some of these will go out of order. You guys know how I do to make the sewing process easier. All right, now I will be starting at step number 8, so go ahead and grab pattern piece number 8, which is your right side of your pants and then your yoke back. So grab pattern piece number 7 and 8 now. And what go ahead and grab pattern piece number 7, which is your back. And what you're going to do, so this is my back, and what you want to definitely do is make sure you mark the right side and the wrong side of your pattern piece. So I'm just going to mark 7 and right back on the back pattern piece on both sides, so I know what pant leg this is, because you definitely do not want to get it mixed up with the front. Okay, so this is my back pattern piece, and grab pattern piece number 8, which is your yoke. And also, if you have not marked it, make sure you mark the wrong side of pattern piece number 8, your yoke. And I like to just kind of like keep everything together, so that's why I make sure I write what it is on my pattern piece. Okay, now you have, I'm going to put one of my yokes out of the way because you're going to do this for both. So now what you have is you have pattern piece number 7 and 8. So what I'm going to do is take one out of the way, and then you have some notches at the bottom. Okay, so what you want to do is, with right sides together, you want to match up those notches that you have. Okay, so make sure you are matching up that notch that you have for your pants. Now, I want to make sure that my notches are correct, so I am going to be looking for my notch. And this one lines up perfectly. So you're going to pin all the way across your back pattern piece. I'm going to bring the instructions back, as you can see, because I know some of you guys are visual people. So therefore you have one notch right there. So you're going to look for that pattern piece. Okay, so you have one notch here, and then you have one notch here at the top. Okay, so when you are looking at it wrong sides together, essentially you will have, this is the back pattern piece and this is the wrong side, so they should be like this. Okay, all the way across. So what I'm going to do is, I know, matching up what the pattern has, I know this needs to be like this. and make sure that it matches all the way across. So I'm going to pin at that notch all the way across my yoke. So go ahead and pin now. All right, so now that I have my yoke back pinned to my back using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, sew across that seam and then finish off your seam allowance and press your seam down towards the back of your pants. You're gonna do that for both pants, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I attached my yoke back to my front, I went ahead and stay stitched using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. That's this line. So basically line your front up at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and stay stitch on the portion of your pants. Okay, so on the pants, when you press your seam allowance down towards the pants, you need to go ahead and stay stitch on the portion of your pants. All right, after you do that, you're going to stay stitch the top on your yoke. Okay, stay stitch is done at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're stitching this one at 1/4 of an inch. That's basically after you press your seam allowance down, 1/4 of an inch stay stitch, meaning that you do not need to back stitch at the beginning or at the end. The yoke stay stitch is a 1/2 inch across in the direction of the arrows. So basically what you are doing is starting at the side seam and stay stitched towards the crotch curve of your pants on both of your pants leg. All right, so now that I talked about that, go ahead and move your back pattern piece or pant leg out of the way. Grab pattern piece number 6 and 11, which are your front and your pockets. Now I'm going to move one of my front pattern pieces out of the way because you're going to do this on both fronts pant legs. Okay, now first things first that I want to mention is if you grab your pattern piece, you should have, I'm going to get the other pant leg for pattern piece number 6 so you can see this. All right, so you should have transferred all your notches and your dots, and you have a stitching line right here for your side pocket. Okay, your flap, I'm sorry, your side flap. Now what you want to do is, if you grab pattern piece number 6, a couple of things you want to do. After you transfer all your notches and your dots, you want to make sure that you transfer the stitching line. Now I'm going to show you how I did mine. I grabbed a little handy dandy tracing wheel, and all I did was trace the line for it all the way around. It's going to give you some bumps in your fabric. Then you just basically, you know, I just use a white soluble marking pencil and then basically just mark the lines. So that's what I did for mine. So make sure you transfer that stitching line onto the front, not the wrong side, but onto the front of your pattern piece. Also make sure you have your dots for your flap line and your pocket if you want that cargo style pocket on the side of your pants. All right, so the next thing you're gonna do, this is pattern piece number 6 with the right side facing up towards me. Grab pattern piece number 11. Now you're going to need 2 for the front, 2 for the back, okay? So what I'm going to do is move 2 out of the way, and 2 will be for the back for my pants. So you're gonna do this to the front and to the back. And all you need to do is, with right sides facing, you're going to attach the pocket to the side of your front, and you're going to do the same thing for the back. So go ahead and match up that notch and pin there, pin at the top and at the bottom. Now before you pin your pocket, I'm going to do this at the sewing machine. Before you attach your pocket, you want to go ahead and stay stitch the upper edge of your front. Stay stitch is done at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you want to stay stitch from the side seam all the way to the front, so make sure you do that. So what I'm going to do is unpin just the top portion, so I'm able to do that. And so it just basically keeps me from going back and forth to the sewing machine. So I'm going to pin all the way down and just not pin the top portion. So go ahead and finish pinning. Now that I am done pinning my pocket to my front using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, all right? Finish off your seam allowance and then press your seam allowance towards your pocket, all right? Now, I want to recap one more time. So the first thing you're going to do is from the side seam to the front, you're going to stay stitch a 1/2 inch. Stay stitch, you do not need to back stitch at the beginning or at the end. Just make sure you use a regular length stitch. After you do that, you're going to stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and so on your pockets for both fronts and both back, and then finish off your seam allowance. Go ahead and sew your pockets on to the front and the back now. All right, so what I'm gonna do is back stitch at the beginning using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, get to this dot, back stitch at this dot, break by threads, start at this dot, back stitch at the beginning, and then sew all the way up to the end. Once I do that, I'm gonna finish off my side seams and then press my seam towards the pockets. So you should have this piece open, and you're gonna make sure that you press your pockets towards both of your front and back pattern piece. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn the side seams, and I also pressed the side seams towards the back. So what I did was right after the pockets, I did clip the back seam allowance, and then I pressed the seam towards the back, which is this portion right here where you have that yoke back. I pressed it towards the back of my pants. Now the next thing you're gonna do is you're going to stay stitch along this stitching line. So stay stitch is basically instead of stay stitching, you will be top stitching. So I do apologize about that. So you're gonna top stitch across, go across, lift your presser foot up, and then stitch along the line, lifting your presser foot up and making sure you go pretty slow to make sure your stitch is in place. Now I'm going to do all of this at the same time. So the next thing, so I'm gonna move this out of the way because I wanna cut down on how many times I go back and forth to the sewing machine. So I'm gonna move out this out my way. Now, what you wanna do is go ahead and grab your trim. Now, I'm gonna grab the instructions. Now on the instructions, it tells you to cut a piece of trim the length of your side seam opening plus a 1/2 inch. My side seam opening is 6 inches. Add a 1/2 inch to that is 6.5. So I made my own trim using some scrap fabric, some Ankara scrap fabric that I had in my scrap fabric. That's why I say you can always use scraps for different things like pockets and things of that nature. So I'm using some self-made trim. Now my trim measures 6.5 across by 3/4 inch high. All right, so that's what my trim measures. So across, if you want to make your own trim like I did, 6.5 inches across, 3/4 of an inch high up, and then close out your box. So I pretty much drafted mine. You could do the same thing if you choose. All right, then what you're gonna do is if you make your trim, press your trim in half and then fold in the sides. So I pressed it in half and then folded in the sides, pressed it down. So it's going to go this way where you have a clean top and bottom on the side seam of my pocket. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to do that. So now grab your pants and you want to put the side seam towards the front side seam. So just it's gonna look like this. What you want to do now is fold in about 1/4 of an inch and place it right where that dot is, okay? And then just pin it there. All right, so I'm just gonna pin mine there. Make sure that that edge is flushed with the edge of the front portion of your pocket, okay? That finished edge. So I'm just gonna move the back out of the way as much as I can, and I'm just going to basically put some pins right there. All right, and then when I get to the bottom, I'm gonna do the same thing, fold in about 1/4 of an inch, and then do the same thing and pin. So I want to make sure it's lined up with that pressed edge, and it is. Make sure it looks really, really good. and then I'm just going to pin there as well. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch across and then top stitch all the way around. And then what I'm going to do is, using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to tack it down on both sides, a 1/4 of an inch on both sides, making sure that this stays in place. So go ahead and do your top stitching first, and then tack the trim down at the bottom, the top, and a 1/4 of an inch from both of the press edge. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and top stitch around the pocket area, I went ahead and add on the trim. The next thing you want to do is look inside, and you will notice that you have pockets. So what you're going to do is right sides together. Make sure you move your front and your back pattern piece out of the way, and you just want to attach your pocket pieces right sides together. Go ahead and pin all the way around. Now that I have my pocket pin, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and sew all the way around, and back stitch at the end. Once you finish stitching, go ahead and finish off your pocket. Press it towards the front. Make sure not to the back. The back is where you have the yoke. Press it to the front and then base the top within that seam allowance. So I will be basting at about a 3/8 of an inch, using the longest basting stitch. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and finished off the pocket, I went ahead and pressed the pocket towards the front. This is the front portion of my pants, so you could see where I have that trim. And then I went ahead and basted the top to keep the pocket towards the front of my pants and not towards the back. So you should have a nice clean pocket. Now, one thing I will mention is the trim. So I have the trim right here, and like I have, this is supposed to be 3/8 inch trim. So because it's 3/8, you're gonna fold it in half. Just to show you how you do the trim, you fold it in half, open it out, and then press both sides, which will look something like this. When you press both sides, you should press it just like this, and then you would fold it onto itself, okay? So that's basically what your trim should be: 6.5 inches long by 0.75 inch high, or 6.5 by 3/4 inch high. I told you I made my own pattern, so basically that's what you're gonna have to do. All right, moving on to the next thing. After you have your pockets done, go ahead and move your pants off to the side. And what I want you to do is grab pattern piece number 12 and 13. We're gonna work on the side pocket band and the side pocket. So what you wanna do is grab pattern piece number 13, and then with wrong sides together, you want to fold it in half, just like this. So both of your notches should match up, and you're just gonna pin there. Now that I have it pinned, now all you're gonna do is baste across this. Now I'm gonna baste using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. There's no need to back stitch at the beginning or the end. So go ahead and baste across your side pocket band now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn my side pocket band with wrong sides together, I went ahead and gave it a press. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 12, your side pocket. And what you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're gonna pin your side pocket band to your side pocket. Now, just make sure that you have that little X or dot or whatever you have, that needs to be facing the right side of your side pocket. So I'm just going to match that notch up on both the side pocket band and the side pocket. I'm going to pin there at that notch, and then pin the top and the bottom, or pin across. Now that I have it pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the pocket band attached to the pocket, I have it finished off at the bottom. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and add in your button. Now from the pattern, the pattern envelope, it says to add 5/8 of an inch button. So I'm going to add mine on once I create my box. So I'm just gonna add it on right here and zigzag using my sewing machine. So that's what I'm gonna do for mine here shortly. Now what you're going to do is make sure you finish off with your serger all the way around the pocket, okay? Now I'm gonna do that after I I'm gonna do that and then create a 5/8 of an inch basting stitch down the sides, both sides, and across the bottom, and then I'm going to press it under. So I'm going to create that 5/8 of an inch down both sides and the bottom, and then I'm going to press it under, getting it prepared to put on my pants. All right, so go ahead and finish off the sides and the bottom, and then create 5/8 of an inch seam allowance along the side and the bottom, just a basting stitch 5/8 of an inch along the side and the bottom, and then give it a good press in that to create your pocket. All right, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my side pocket and band completely sewn, right, go ahead and grab your pants. And one thing I want to mention is make sure that your seam allowance is pressed towards the back of your pants, okay? So now I'm gonna hope that you could see this, but you should have 4 dots, all right? So the bottom 2 is for your pocket and the top 2 is for your flaps, okay? So what you wanna do is you want to make sure that your pocket is in between the bottom 2, okay? So then you're just gonna pin your pocket right where that X is. So just pin both of the sides and along the bottom, making sure that that peak of your pocket right here is along the center of your pants. So go ahead and pin your pocket in place now. All right, so now that I have my pocket sewn, now that I have my pocket pinned on using basically 1/4 of an inch or whatever seam allowance you want, I'm just going to top stitch all the way around my pocket, so that's both sides and the bottom. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my pockets attached to my pants, go ahead and move this off to the side and grab pattern piece number 14, your side flaps. All right, so now what you're going to do with the side flap is you're going to attach twill tape around this circle. So for the twill tape, you need to cut, if you're using twill tape, you will need to cut 3 1/4 inch long of 3/8 inch wide twill tape. Now because I'm making my own by using some scrap, if you want to do exactly like I did, all you have to do is measure 3 1/4 across and 3/8 of an inch high, because what you're going to do is fold it in half, and when you fold it in half you have 3/8 of an inch, okay? So that's what I did for mine. Like I said, I do a lot of drafting my own to keep from having to buy things, all right? So what you're going to do is fold this in half, and I'm gonna press mine. I'm gonna press mine in half just like this. And then I'm just going to, whatever the raw side is, I'm just going to basically make sure that both ends is even with that raw edge at the bottom and baste across, all right? So you're just gonna baste across. You can baste across at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. After you do that, what you're going to do is grab the other flap, which is that has interfacing on it, and you're going to attach it right sides together, right? So you're gonna pin all the way around and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, so all the way around and back stitch at the end. So go ahead and do that now. So the first thing you're gonna do is baste your twill tape onto this, onto your side pocket flap or your side flap. You're gonna baste it on, and then with right sides together attach the side flap pocket, side flap interface portion to the side flap. All right, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the flap completely sewn together, just to give you a little backstory, I went ahead and have my tab that's going to be right there, or, you know, twill tape, whatever you use, right sides together, attached using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I trimmed it down, and then I just kind of like clipped into my corners so it will lay flat. So now what I'm going to do is turn it right side out. If you need your point turner, grab it. So just make sure that you are not rough with it so you don't poke any holes in your flap, okay? So now what you're gonna do is go ahead and press it. Now I'm gonna press mine, but I'm just gonna show you before I attach it to my pants. Now go ahead and grab your pant leg. And what you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to attach your side flap to your pocket. So I'm just going to straighten this out. I know it's getting wrinkled because I'm balling it up, putting it off to the side. But what you want to do is basically you want to attach it. You have 2 dots right here. So what you want to do is, first of all, before you do that, sew across this top part of your flap using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're just going to base across, and then once you base across, you should have 2 dots. Now you don't have to do this if you do not want to, but I'm going to do this for mine. You're going to match up those dots. So basically match that dot up and this dot over here. If you do not want to base across, you just match it up. Now remind you that you're going to match it up with the flap like this. Make sure the flap is up, and you're going to match it up and pin. You're going to sew across basically right on top of that stitching, that basting line that you created, okay, after you base this. Now if you do not create the basting line, you're just going to base across using a regular length stitch, not based across, but stitch across using a regular length stitch, and then just go from that dot to the other dot and then trim this down. All right, so go ahead and attach your flap onto your pant and trim it down. Once you trim it down, you will fold this over to meet up with this button, and then you're just going to top stitch about 1/4 of an inch away. So just to recap, either you will base this top edge 5/8 of an inch seam allowance across. Once you do that, match up that dot that you have on both sides of the flap, match up that dot, sew across, trim it down. Once you trim it down, fold it over, and then top stitch about 1/4 of an inch from this pressed edge. All right, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn on my flap, I top stitch it. The next thing you're gonna do is go ahead and attach your pant at the inseam. So go ahead and grab the other pant leg. Now the inseam, make sure you are looking at the right part where your flap is. So what you're going to do is, the inseam is the front portion of your pant. Now what they essentially want you to do is basically attach it like this, and then slide one pant leg into the other. So I'm going to attach at the inseam, so I'm just going to fold my pant leg in half, and I'm going to match up that notch that's right here on the inseam, pin at the top and along the side seam. So go ahead and pin all the way down your inseam now. Now that I have my inseam pin, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance. Do that for both of your pants, and then turn one pant leg right side out. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn the inseam, which is this seam right here, I finished it off. And then I pressed the seam allowance towards the back portion of my pants. That's where you see the back yoke right up here, okay? Now, if you notice that one pant leg is with wrong side out and the other pant leg is with right side out, okay? So what I'm gonna do is take the pant leg with the right side out and I'm going to slide it into the pant leg that has the wrong side out. Now, normally I will not do this, but for the sake of following the instructions, I'm doing it this way because if I was going to do it a different way, I should have done that first before attaching everything else. All right, so I'm just going to do it this way. Now, what you want to do is match up your seam allowance. So right sides together, match up that inseam or, you know, crotch seam, and you're going to pin. You're going to match up your notches. So these notches right here are for the back portion of your pants. So you're going to match up your notches as well. So match up those notches right here and pin, and then pin all the way around. You will have a notch in the front, 2 notches in the front, 3 notches in the back to signify the back. So go ahead and pin your crotch seam or your crotch curve now. All right, so now that I have the crotch curve pin all the way around, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, so all the way along the crotch seam, back stitch at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew twice. I'm going to sew the first one at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, and then sew the second one at 3/8 of an inch, just to enforce that crotch curve, and then I will finish off with my serger. So go ahead and sew your crotch seam now. All right, so now that I have my crotch seam sewn, all right, so it's looking good. The seam is sewn there. Go ahead and move your cargo pant out of the way. And then I need you to grab pattern piece number 16, which is your casing. All right, so now that you should have 2 casings, and make sure that you have transferred your buttonholes, and also make sure that you have transferred your 2 dots in whatever size that you are doing, all right? Now, what you want to do, now a couple of things you want to do is make sure you put some interfacing on the back side of your where your buttonholes are going to be. So I'm going to cut a piece of interfacing and just make a little square to put on the back side of just one side of your interfacing. All right, after you do that, I'm going to turn mine so you can see it. All right, with right sides together, you want to pin. So you're going to pin on the right side like you see me doing here. You're going to pin between the dots. Pin at this top dot and pin at the second dot. All right, you want to make sure you match up your notches as well. Pin at that notch and pin at the bottom. And then on the other side, you want to pin the entire length of your casing. So make sure you match up the notch, pin at the notch, pin at the top, and pin at the bottom. So go ahead and pin now. Now that I have it pinned, what you're going to do on the right hand side where you have the dots, you're going to start at the beginning, back stitch at the beginning, sew to this dot, back stitch at the dot. Break your threads and then start at this second dot, back stitch at this second dot, and then sew all the way down to the end and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, come over to the other side. On the left hand side where you just have the notch, you're just going to sew up this entire seam, back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, finish off your seam allowance. Now I will be finishing off my seam allowance, you know, basically instead of serging it separately, I'm just going to serge it as one seam. That's what I'm going to do. Do whatever it is that you want to do. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my casing sewn together at the side seams, now one side seam, the one where I just sewn all the way down, I just basically serged it together in one seam. And then the other side, because this is pressed open, because you have a little opening right here, I made sure to serge it individually. So you could do the same thing as well. Now, I also added interfacing to my buttonhole area. So now what you want to do is you want to have wrong sides together and you want to fold your casing in half. Now I'm going to fold it in half and pin it. Okay, so just fold your casing in half and pin it all the way around. So go ahead and do that now, matching up your notches as well. All right, so now that I have my casing pinned all the way around, I'm going to start at the side seam. All I'm going to do is base at about 3 8/7 inch seam allowance all the way around to keep this together. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and give it a good press. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and base the top portion of my casing, go ahead and grab your pants, and we're going to attach our casing to our pants. All right, so now that I have my pants and I have the front facing me, and what I want to do is make sure that on the casing, the portion that you interface. So if you don't remember, I would say just pull up a couple of stitches in the front because it's going to be hidden anyway, and see which side, this side or that side, that you made your you put interfacing on. Now I know simply because I made sure not to stitch that little portion that wasn't interfaced, so I could see that. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and pin your casing. Now, one thing I will mention is you want to make sure that that portion where you have the opening, you want to make sure that portion is on the outside, because when you turn it in, you want it to be on the inside, okay? So when you do that, you want to make sure that that portion is facing you. Now, keep in mind the area that is unopened, okay? So I need to make mine like this to make sure that the portion that has the interfacing is still to the front, okay? That's where your drawstring is going to go. So I'm going to pin it just like this, making sure that I can see my little opening for my drawstring to go through. That should be on the side seam, okay? And then what you're going to do is pin your, not through both, you just make sure you pinning your casing to the front portion of your pants. So go ahead and match up your notches in the front. You're going to make sure you match up your side seams as well, and then match up your notches in the back. So go ahead and pin all the way around now. All right, so now that I have my casing pinned all the way around on my pants, I'm gonna start in the back, and using 5 8/7 inch seam allowance, I'm gonna back stitch at the beginning, so all the way around, and back stitch at the end using a regular length stitch. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and finish off my seam allowance and then press my seams towards the pants. Now, if you want to put it in a label, the chance to do so is now. However, because these are basically test or a wearable muslin, I will not be adding a label to mine right now. I would probably add it once I put the elastic in. Now, the rule of thumb is I don't add it when I'm doing casing. I wait until I put my casing in, because I want my casing to slide all the way through. So I will not attach my label right now. I'll attach it once I put the elastic through. Just a rule of thumb of what I do. All right, so go ahead and sew your casing onto your pants now. All right, so now that I have my casing attached to my pants, I went ahead and finished it off at the bottom, and then I went ahead and created stitching lines on my casing to sift my elastic through. Now, the top casing, I'm sorry, the top stitch is at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and the second stitch is at 1 1/4. Now, what you need to do is go in where you have that opening. You will sift your elastic all the way through, all the way until you get to the end, and then you have two options. You can either tack it down at the end or just zigzag stitch the elastic closed. Make sure that your elastic is not tangled up inside your casing, okay? So make sure of that. Now, I know you see 3 rows. However, I am only putting elastic at the top and at the bottom. I'm going to leave the row where I have my buttonholes, which I did go ahead and make my buttonholes in the front portion of my casing. Now, one thing I will mention is how they have this buttonhole. It's a little off-centered. I should have made my buttonhole centered, but it's okay because it's just a drawstring. And like I said, this is going to be a wearable muslin, just to show you how to do this. And yes, I am going to wear this as a wearable muslin, but if you do your buttonhole, make sure that they are centered with this front seam, okay? Now, me personally, I may not even wear the drawstring. We will see. The elastic may do to where I could add another row of elastic and not even worry about it, to be honest. So I will be making a drawstring just to see, and I will be using the same fabric as my little trim just to make the drawstring. All right, now from the back of the pattern, you could either make your own drawstring, or you can go ahead and get some twill tape and make your drawstring. Now I'm gonna grab the pattern and tell you, if you wanna make your own drawstring, you need to cut a piece of fabric that measure 81 inches, okay? So because you have to add seam allowance, go ahead and make it about 82 inches long by 3/4 of an inch wide. Because what's gonna happen is you're gonna fold it in half like we did for the trim and the loop. You're going to fold it in half and then fold it into where all seams are enclosed. So, and then you're gonna sift it all the way through, you know, stitch it down and then sift it all the way through. So you could do that as well. Mine will be done by the time I finish with the leg band. Then I'll come back up and do the casing and sift elastic through all at the same time. All right, so I just wanna give you that. So now that I'm done with my casing, I'm gonna move on down to the leg band. Now this is if you're doing view C. If you are doing view B, follow the directions on the instructions on how to put your tab on. You will have to put your tab on and then make the tab as well and then hem it, okay? So that's view B, but I am doing view C. So what you need to do is, first of all, cut elastic the size of your leg band. This is your waistband, which I already did that. I have my elastic for the waistband. Make sure you do that. But on your leg elastic, it tells you to cut 6. Now, I am not cutting 6 because for me, that's too much elastic. So I'm only cutting 4, and I'm gonna sift it through both the top and the bottom only. I will not be sifting it through the middle of my leg, okay? Just so I don't have so much elastic at the leg, okay? Now, the only piece that I have left that I have not used is pattern piece number 18, which is the leg band, all right? So essentially, you're going to do it exactly like you did it for the waistband, all right? So I'm gonna move my pants out the way for a second. And what you're going to do, like I said, it's gonna be pretty much exactly like you just did for your casing. So what you want to do is, with right sides together, you're going to pin. So like I said, exactly like the casing. So one side you're gonna have dots. So one side you're gonna pin the top and the bottom. So I'm gonna pin this side all the way down. And then on this side where you have, I'm gonna turn it around. This side where you have the dots, you're gonna pin at the dots. And this is the portion that's going to be left open, okay? So now that I have it pinned on the right side, where you see those dots, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning. So to the dot, break my thread, start at the second dot, back stitch at the second dot, and sew all the way down. On the opposite side, I'm gonna sew back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end and sew the entire seam. Once I do that, I'm gonna finish off this side seam together, but on this side, I'm gonna finish it off separately because they're gonna be pressed open and then turned onto itself with wrong sides together. You're gonna turn up that hem, baste it, and then we're going to attach it to our pant leg, all right? Now, I'm gonna do everything all the way up into attaching it to our leg bands. So if you do not remember what I just did for the waistband, rewind it back so you could do that exactly the same way for your leg band. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my leg band done, I attached it right sides together. I folded it in half with the wrong sides together. I went ahead and basted the top, and then I made two rows of stitching. Like I said, I'm only gonna do two threads of elastic all the way around instead of 3. I don't see the need for 3, to be honest, but if you are doing 3 rows of casing, or making 3 lines, you need to make the first one at a 1/2 inch and the second one at 1 inch. Now what I did is just create one line at 1 1/4, and I'm just going to sift my elastic, 2 rows of elastic through that casing. So I made mine at 1 1/4 because I'm only using 2, but if you are doing 3 rows of casing, use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, so the only thing left to do is attach your leg band to your pant leg. So just grab your pants, one leg, and what you want to do is attach it where you have the opening on the inside. So it's going to look like this. Now I am looking at the right side of my pants. I'm going to make sure that that opening is on the outside facing me, and I'm going to be attaching it to the inseam seam line, okay? So make sure that you are attaching to the inseam, and make sure that your seam allowance for your pants is facing towards the back of your pants, okay? So I have that where I want it, and I'm going to pin there. And then I'm gonna go to the other side, and I'm gonna make sure that that seam allowance right here is still facing the back. Now, if you don't know what side is your back and your front, please make sure, you are making sure that your seam allowance is pressed towards the back, all right? Then you're gonna basically pin there. Now, remind you, you only have one seam line, so make sure you have it pinned correctly, all right? So what you wanna do now is just pin your leg band to your pants all the way around now, making sure that it's even. So go ahead and pin all the way around now. All right, so now that I have one of my pants, I'm gonna do the other one off camera, but just for the sake of time on this tutorial, I went ahead and pinned the leg band all the way around, and I'm gonna start at the inseam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, so all the way around, back stitch at the end. Once you do that, finish off your seam allowance with your serger or pinking shears, whatever you're using to finish off your seam allowance, and then press it towards the pant. So you're gonna press your seam allowance up towards the pants. Once you do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna top stitch just to give it some definition for that seam allowance, okay, on my pant. After you do that, go ahead and sift your elastic all the way through and basically secure your elastic with the zigzag stitch. After you do that, you are all done with your pant. So go ahead and rock it. If you make these pants, make sure you tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. Also, if you make these pants, you can also comment on it here on YouTube and let me know that you made the pants, but also share photos with me on Instagram. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Until next time. All right, so there you have it. That is the entire video, the pattern review and the sew along. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. If you make these cargo style pants, go ahead and tag me in your post on Instagram so I could share with others in my stories and on my feed. All right, and that's at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. And if you would like to support the channel, do not forget to buy me a coffee. I will put it up on the screen so you're able to do that as well. Well, that's it for the video. And as always, keep sewing.